coming, don't stand in the way. Fair tax is coming across the USA. Fair tax is coming, clean up this mess. We got to get rid of the IRS. Hey, hey! Hey, hey! On April 5th.
Hello and welcome once again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
And we are the
FAIRtax
FAIRtax Guys. And we've just about gone full circle here, Ron. We've been on the air for about a year and a half with FAIRtax Power Radio.
And I think it's time to go back to our roots.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who may have not even really figured out why the fair tax even exists.
Yeah.
And the idea, of course, is that it needs to replace the current income tax system. Now, most people have lived their entire lives knowing nothing but the income tax.
Yeah.
And they figured that that's the way you're supposed to fund the government because it's always been that way.
Yeah, we've gotten so used to it, like withholding.
Yeah.
We're used to having, withholding taken out of our paychecks before we get a chance to take it home and provide for our families.
Yeah, but the truth of the matter is just because we've always done it that way doesn't mean it's the best way to do it. And
Absolutely.
when you think about it, the current income tax system we've got is the absolute worst possible way. You could not start with a blank sheet of paper and come up with a worse way to fund the government than what our income tax is morphed into. I mean, think about it. You've got to report the most inefficient, most intrusive, invasive system you could possibly imagine. I mean, let's have a way to fund the government, and everybody will have to tell the government all the intimate details of their personal finances, and then all the employers and banks and brokerage houses, anybody that gives people money, we'll make them do the same thing, and we'll report it all, and we'll just trust everybody to tell me what their income is, and we'll figure this out. And you talk about fraud and abuse.
I don't think the founders would appreciate the system we have right now.
Well, the founders actually outlawed the income tax.
That's
the
right.
original Constitution did not allow for it.
Let's start right there. Why is there a 16th Amendment? We had to amend the Constitution to give Congress the authority to tax our income. Just the fact that we had to amend the Constitution is evidence enough that we should not have done it.
Okay, well, again, let's concentrate on two primary things of why the current income tax system needs to go away. First, of course, is just the invasive, invading your privacy kind of inefficiency as well. And then there's just flat out abuse that the IRS perpetrates on people. Which
I have to believe that both political parties are responsible for that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's done.
Yeah, the fair tax is a nonpartisan issue. We're not
not
going to get into placing the blame of why our income tax system is so bad. We'll just point it is. We need to fix it. And of course, the politicians have given us exactly what they want. Mm-hmm. They love selling tax favors to K Street lobbyists.
I'll give you an example. A number of years ago, I remember hearing on the radio station that I listened to, people were up in arms because in 2010, GE paid no taxes. And people were just hooting and hollering and yelling at GE. And I called up and said, hey, let's keep in mind that GE paid no taxes legally. All right? They avoided taxes. Tax avoidance, if you're within the law, is within the law. It's not illegal. All right? Tax evasion, yeah, that's another story. GE avoided taxes legally by structuring their income and their finance and so forth. And if you want to blame somebody, blame Congress.
All right. Amen. Well, I'll tell you, let's talk about the inefficiency to begin with.
Yeah.
The IRS itself admits to something they call a net tax gap.
Yeah.
Which is defined as taxes that are, legally owed but are never collected. Take a wild guess as to how much. Of course, you know how much that is. Everybody out there that's listening to the program, and take a wild guess as to how much is actually owed but never collected because of just all of the various inefficiencies in the system.
I'll give you a hint. It's in the billions with a B. All right.
And it's three figures worth of billions
with
a B.
Yeah, unfortunately it is. It's up around $600 billion. That's taxes that are not collected that should be collected because people are evading them. And like I said, evasion is illegal, but it happens because this complicated tax code is such that it's easy to get around it. I mean, there are some people who make a living. I remember hearing about some guy that, cleans pools or something like that. And he lives completely off the grid. Everything's cash. He never claims anything. Nothing.
He has no income and no documents from anybody that can dispute that he doesn't make any money.
And the thing is, that may be one example, but unfortunately there are millions of examples. And there's also examples of tax preparers who send in fraudulent returns, and they get refunds that not supposed to exist. People who are claiming all kinds of deductions or exemptions, children and so forth. All right, it's a tremendous waste. Right, the tax code is so complicated, and our country is so populated that it's really impossible to keep up with. Even if the IRS were doing a 100% job, when people are evading it, and another reason for evasion is that you've got fewer people getting W-2s and more people working on 1099s. What that means is that you've got a greater percentage of people who are like in business for themselves and can be, as we say, a little creative with their tax return. And yet if you're working for somebody and you're getting a W-2, it's almost impossible to cheat on your taxes. I mean, you get your paycheck, it's taken out before you get it, and that's it. But so for a variety of reasons, tax evasion is becoming a real problem, and it's becoming very evident to the people in Congress. I mean, you might be saying, well, how are we ever going to get this passed? The people in Congress. Well, more and more, as we've talked about in the past, people in Congress are becoming evident. It's becoming evident to them that the evasion is becoming a big problem. And Bob, if it's $600 billion now, what's it going to be next year?
Probably a little more than that.
Yeah.
But you touched on something a second ago that deserves expansion, and that is the fraudulent refunds.
Oh,
fraudulent refunds plus identity theft, which is becoming one of the more prevalent crimes in today's society, equals billions and billions of dollars that the IRS literally just hands over to thieves.
Yeah. How is it that the IRS can send multiple tax returns, refunds, I should say, to the same address? Like not only 10 or 12, but maybe 100 of them to the same address. Shouldn't that raise some red flags someplace?
Yeah, and the deal is that there is a basic problem with the system that allows that.
Yeah,
I mean, you can almost not, you don't blame the ones that are working the system because they can, but the deal is, of course, that's illegal and hope they get caught. But the fact that the system even allows that to happen is why the system needs to be yanked out by the roots and replaced with a fair tax.
Absolutely. And, and Bob and I are not coming down on the employees of the IRS, too. They have an impossible task. Impossible. How many pages to the tax code? It's up around 75,000. When you consider all the instructions and the regulations and the court cases that go on, it's up around 75,000. How can any one person or even any entity be responsible for that? There are companies that have an entire wing, you might say, of people who all they do is study the tax code, one, to make sure that they're complying with the law, that they're not doing anything illegal, and two, to make sure that they're taking advantage of every deduction and loophole and exemption that they could possibly do. Yeah,
but that goes back to something. Remember the studies that Money Magazine did in the mid-'80s?
Yeah.
Talking about tax preparers?
Yes.
If you hadn't heard this, this is amazing that they took like 50 tax preparers. They just pulled them at random from various major cities. And this was Money Magazine trying to create a test to see how accurate these tax preparers were. And they created this hypothetical family. Mm-hmm. And he did not have a hugely complicated financial situation, a job, maybe some investments, some kids in college, own a house, stuff, typical stuff that most taxpayers will run into and that most tax preparers should have been prepared to handle. And they sent this theoretical family out to 50 different tax preparers and asked them a simple question. How much money does this family owe in federal income taxes? And of the 50 tax preparers, how many different answers did they get?
They got 50 different answers. Most of the years. They did this for like 8 or 10 years. I think 1 year they got 49 different answers. Yeah. There was actually two people. I was
thinking 1 year they got 49.
And they also scattered them around the country. They had them in large cities. They had them in small towns and so forth. They had them with big firms. They had them with individuals. They really scattered the 50 around, so there'd be quite a sampling. and 50 different answers, which you can. And somebody said, "Well, which one was right?" Who could ever tell? All of them.
Whichever one the auditor wants to agree with is right. You
Yeah.
know? But that's it. You're thinking about it. Tax preparers who make a living supposedly keeping up with the tax code and knowing how to apply the tax code to an individual situation, the system is so complicated that even the pros, whose job it is to keep up with it, can't do it.
Yeah.
So how do you think you and I can do that?
No.
Or just average Joe Blow? He can't do it. It's
for
just
myself,
not possible.
I just buy the software and I put it on my computer and I hope the company that's writing the software has it right.
And trust that it's right, too.
Yeah,
I mean,
because
but that's just it. But if you ever called into an audit, and there are so many ways to calculate your taxes, there's a really, really good chance that when the auditor sits down with you and says, Mr. Ron, our figures don't match, guess what?
Yeah.
I owe you a $15,000 refund.
Yeah.
Never happens.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
always, you owe me.
Yeah. And if you do overpay and you get a refund, what about all that interest, huh? Oh, wait a minute. They don't pay interest,
no,
do they?
they don't.
Yeah.
And that's another problem. People think that the tax refund that they get, maybe if they overpay their withholding, is just a windfall. That the government's giving them money. And the truth is, they are giving you back your own money that they took from you over the past 12 months.
I saw a good graphic on the Facebook the other day, and it shows a guy at the drive-through window of a fast food restaurant. And the text was, if I gave you $20 for a $7.50 purchase and you give me my change of $12.50, does that mean I go, woohoo, I got a refund? No, that means I got my change back. It's the same thing with the refund from the federal government.
So, okay, back to what we're talking about. Just the sheer complexity of the system demands that it go away.
Yeah,
it was 70-some thousand pages that even the professionals can't figure out.
Well, and the other thing, as far as business goes, I mean, business has to spend so much time and resources complying with the tax code and researching the tax code to make sure they're taking advantage of every loophole, because Congress loves their loopholes, to help their political friends. It's so complicated that business spends a lot of time researching and complying with the tax code. They have to hire CPAs and tax attorneys and so forth. The returns are extremely difficult and voluminous, you might say, to hand in. That costs them money. It's a cost of doing business. And who pays for that cost of doing business?
Yeah, that's just it. The compliance costs are out of sight,
Yeah.
over and above the tax liability.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, what happens to those costs? They get embedded into the cost of the products and services that the consumers buy.
That's right. And who's the consumers? We are.
So why don't we just replace all that with a simple tax that you pay at the cash register when you buy something?
Now, think of something else. Bob we're talking about the compliance costs, which the figures I've seen add up to about $430 billion a year. That's what it costs individuals and businesses to comply. That's just complying with the tax code. That's not the tax itself. $430 billion, along with the $600 billion that they're not collecting, we're talking about $1 trillion.
Take this one step further. All those embedded tax costs that are embedded into the price of the goods and services that American manufacturers and service providers provide puts them at a horrible disadvantage on the global market.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And that's another reason that we have simply got to get rid of this thing, because we've got a trade deficit with just about every country on the planet.
Yep.
Because it's cheaper to produce goods in China and Mexico than it is to produce them here.
Let's put a figure on that embedded cost, Bob.
I don't have it off the top of my head.
It's about 22%.
Oh, okay.
Yep, it's about 22% on average. Now, for some industries it's more, for some industries it's less, but on average about 22%.
Oh, okay, I didn't understand the question. I knew
that. Every new product you purchase and every service you pay for, on average, 22% of the cost of that product or service is due to the complexity and the tax code itself, all right, the legal part, all that. For everything, groceries, a new car, the doctor bill, the plumber, the electrician, new homes and so forth, everything that we purchase, on average, 22% higher because of the tax code.
It just gets passed on.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, if you ask me for one reason why we should get rid of the income tax, it's because I don't think it's right for we the people to have to share more about the intimate details of our personal finances with the government than we're willing to give with our kids.
Yeah, as we're recording this, it's tax time. People are scurrying around trying to get their tax return done. And the information that's required on that tax return, I mean, years ago, when I was doing graduate courses, I was in education, and I'm running here and there, getting my graduate courses because I lived out in the boonies and there wasn't any college nearby. I had to put down, my expenses for my continuing education. Well, if you're going to claim mileage, they want to know what kind of car you have, when you bought it, what year it is, how many other miles do you put on it. All this information that. Well, what business is it of theirs?
What would Thomas Jefferson think of that system?
Oh my God! Yeah, that's a good. We should do one on Thomas Jefferson.
I think we can do that.
Yeah. But anyway, so it's terribly intrusive. Then you also get the part where it's abusive. I mean, just plain abusive on the part of the IRS. And again, I'm not coming down on the employees. Congress has given the IRS the authority to do some of these things. Now, here's what I'm talking about. When you get a chance, go to YouTube and do a search for Carol Hinders. Carol Hinders. She's a kind of a grandmother type woman. I can't remember what state, but she runs a little restaurant, and she's one of the few people that have a restaurant that's all cash. She doesn't take credit cards. It's all cash. And it must be that her customers like it because she's been in business for almost 40 years. Suddenly, about breakfast time one morning, she's enjoying her own breakfast at home. She gets a call from the IRS. We just commandeered your bank account for, I don't know, something like $30,000. Why? Well, she's got an all-cash business. So occasionally she goes to the bank, or on a regular basis, to deposit the money. She's obviously not going to take it home and stuff it under her mattress. She has to put it in the bank. If you deposit $10,000 or more, you are required by law to make a statement to the IRS. Under $10,000, there's no legal requirement. However, the IRS, being so suspicious as they are, they look out for people who are doing what they call structuring. Maybe put $5,000 here, $4,000 there, that are trying to avoid the $10,000 rule. She's this grandmother type woman running a small restaurant that's cash only. She's not doing anything illegal, but the IRS decided in their infinite wisdom that she was guilty of structuring.
Well, think about this a second, though. What business is it of the IRS to be looking at anybody's bank deposits?
Yeah, that's a darn good question. Yeah. Why are they given the authority to do that? So they decided that, she must be structuring. She must be trying. Did they call her up and ask her? Did they send somebody to her business to see what was going on? No. Did they accuse her of anything? No. They did not accuse her of anything. They did not. And how many of the Bill of Rights were violated in this case? Protection against
unreasonable search and
unreasonable
seizure.
Search and seizure.
I could see the wheels turning.
All right. Due process. What are some of the others? I wish Randy was here because he's got the attorney.
How about innocent until proven guilty?
Yeah, innocent until proven. No, all that stuff, the Bill of Rights, out the window. And again, because Congress has allowed them to do that. With the IRS, you have no Bill of Rights. So with this woman, and she's not the only example. There are hundreds of examples of this. Somebody runs a convenience store. Well, in a convenience store, a lot of the transactions are cash. They have to put that money, safely, they have to put it in the bank. And there's cases where people, convenience stores owner putting their money in the bank. Suddenly the IRS comes in and decides, we don't like the way they're doing that. Doesn't accuse them of anything, doesn't investigate, doesn't give them due process. They just come in and seize their bank account. And, it's got to stop.
I believe Carol eventually won her case, but it took forever to do.
Yeah.
And she was just put through the ringer, done absolutely nothing wrong to get her own money, get access back to her own money.
Now, in her case, if I remember correctly, I think there was an entity called the Tax Foundation. I can't remember. Don't quote me on that, but it's in the YouTube video, which is only about 2 minutes long. And the narrator comes on and says, well, we at this organization, I think it's called the Tax Foundation, we took up this case and we helped her get her bank account freed. But you have a small businesswoman like that and they take $30,000. That's her operating capital. How does she buy the what she needs to run her restaurant? The food sources and so forth. How does she pay her employees? It's crazy. And the IRS, it doesn't make any difference. They didn't accuse her of anything. They just swooped in and took the money. And this has happened hundreds of times.
It is. And I tell you, if anybody has a story that they might like to share along this regards, there's a way you can get in touch with us. Several ways. TheFairtaxGuys@gmail.com is our email address, and we're on Facebook. The FAIRtax Guys has a Facebook page. You can check that out. We would love to hear stories like that. In fact, we know of a guy named Bob Matthews who owned a business down in Denellen.
Yep, that's right.
He was an identity theft victim, and he just got into all kinds of trouble with the IRS, and he didn't do it.
Yep.
And that's the point. The system is what needs changing. The system that allows this stuff has got to go away.
Yeah. So the inefficiencies are tremendous, in the hundreds of billions of dollars. All right. The abuses by the IRS. I mean, you want to talk about the targeting conservative groups. That's been in the news for years. Okay, and they still haven't resolved it. Right now, as we talk, there's some people in Congress who are talking about impeaching the commissioner of the IRS because he's stonewalling them in their investigation.
Okay, well, let's add some perspective to that, too, because I'm sure there are some people out there who think the IRS going after conservative groups is a wonderful thing, just based on ideology. But the shoe's been on the other foot before.
Absolutely.
Those of us old enough to remember who Richard Nixon is, he used the IRS as a political weapon against the folks that are on the other side.
Political enemies.
So people on both sides of the aisle have been subject to abuse by the IRS because the other power is using it as a political weapon. And again, that system is wrong. Nobody should be subject to the wrath of the IRS because of what political ideology they believe in or what party they support. And I say both sides have caught it on the chin from that before, and it needs to go away.
Yeah. Just the fact that an agency like that can be weaponized is a good reason to get rid of it, all right? And that's what we need to do. There is a much simpler system, all right? We've been talking a lot about the problems with the current system, all right? We are encouraging you to learn more about the fair tax. That's what this program is all about. And we'll go over more of the details in subsequent programs, but we are all about, we call ourselves the FAIRtax Guys. This is FAIRtax Power Radio. You might take the hint that we're talking about the fair tax.
And the thing that people really need to know and understand about the fair tax, it is not an additional tax on top of all this corrupt and abusive system we've got before. It is a total replacement, absolute total replacement for the current income tax system. Yep. Which means withholding out of your paycheck goes away, having to fill out tax returns goes away, IRS audits go away, IRS agents showing up on your front door and confiscating your business capital goes away.
IRS goes away.
Yeah, the IRS itself goes away. And the fair tax really is the only tax reform proposal that makes that happen. We've got several folks out there now advocating for a flat tax and claiming that a flat tax would get rid of the IRS, but as long as you're collecting income or taxing income on the federal level, there has to be a federal agency to administer and enforce that.
Yeah, and just because they might change the name and not call it the IRS, it's still an agency that can be abusive. Remember, 103 years ago, our income tax started out very, very simple. It was anywhere from 1% to 7% on incomes at the time, incomes over $3,000. Well, in 1903, $3,000 was like $270,000 now. So it was a low percentage on what you would consider fairly wealthy Americans. All right. That didn't stay that way very long because 1903, I misspoke. It's 1913. Yeah, 1913. Several years after that, we entered World War I. The government had to raise a lot of money to fund the war. The rate that was a maximum of 7%, in 1917, 4 years later, 70%, 70. And Congress was warned. There was one senator, and I can't give you his name, but he said, be careful what you're voting for here. Before you know it, the government will be taking 10% of whatever we earn. And he was laughed off the floor of the Senate. That's ridiculous. They'll never do that.
Yeah, and then a generation later, World War II comes along, and that was the reason that they put in withholding.
Yeah.
The government is no longer content with getting your check once a month or once a year at the end of the year. They want money out of you every paycheck, and they'll take it from you off the top. So they, in effect, have made themselves, the government made itself, your highest spending priority. Feeding the government is more important than feeding your family under the current income tax.
What were people
That's
thinking
just wrong.
Yeah, it is. And just the fact that they had to ratify the 16th Amendment, all right, why did people go along with that? I mean, that's done by the state legislatures. Obviously, the people had to speak up. And they said, yeah, we think it's a good idea to tax the wealthy people, to provide some programs for us. Well, didn't stay that way very long. So like Bob says, 30 years later, they passed a withholding law, and now they're taking it from everybody out of the paycheck before you take it home to provide for your family. It's a little crazy.
It is. And I tell you what, we're running short on time here in just a minute, so let's kind of touch on the solution, of course, which is the fair tax.
Yeah.
How do people that don't know what the fair tax is, may have heard the name and that's it, what are some of their best resources for educating themselves on what the fair tax is, and not so much how it works, but actually what it does?
Yeah, we have lots of good stuff. First off, there are several really good books. The FAIRtax book by Bortz and Linder. All right, 2 editions, 2005 and 2008. Look up the FAIRtax book by Bortz and Linder. FAIRtax.org, our website. There's lots of information there. They have one section, FAQs, frequently asked questions. And if how is the fair tax going to affect the seniors? How is the fair tax going to affect this industry and so forth? How will it be collected? All kinds of questions there. And there's also a webinar every month. It's usually on the 4th Thursday of the month at 8 in the evening, and you have to register for it. So you simply go to fairtax.org/webinar. And these webinars, they give a brief introduction of the fair tax, and then they'll take a particular topic. All right, it might be how does the fair tax affect seniors? How is it collected? Whatever, things like that.
And there's another new website I want to get in here before we run out of time.
Absolutely.
Big Solution. I love that. Because
Yeah.
we've got big problems in this country, and the fair tax is a big solution.
Yeah, this is very important.
A lot of the income tax stuff that they're talking about now are just small thinking, rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, if you will. But the fair tax is the big solution to the big problems we are facing.
With the election year we're facing, we're going to get a new president next year. We need to have this legislation ready for the new president. And to do that, we need to build up a database of supporters of several million. So please go to bigsolution.org. There's 4 buttons there. It's a very simple website. There's also a bunch of reasons. There's like 35 or 40 reasons. Why would you like to get rid of the income tax and replace it with a sales tax? All right. So go to bigsolution.org and take a look and contribute. I mean, connect with us, contribute, do whatever you can to help us out.
When you figure it out, you may be a FAIRtax fan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We got to get Jeff Foxworthy involved in this.
Yeah, I think we will here in not too long.
We're going to work on it. But again, we're just about out of time for this episode. Again, if you'd like to get in touch with us, the FAIRtax Guys at gmail.com or the FAIRtax Guys page on Facebook is probably the 2 best ways to get a hold of us. And if you've got an IRS abuse story, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, please keep those cards and letters coming in,
Absolutely. And again, appreciate you listening to FAIRtax Power Radio. We're on SoundCloud, and we're going to get on a new platform called Spreaker here. We'll get on that here shortly.
Going to try to reach out to a bigger number of venues to get this program out there.
All right. Well, that's about it for this time. So I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
The FAIRtax Guys, reminding you that America's big solution, the fair tax, once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
Don't send it